Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we are tackling a figure who is, well, to put it mildly, colossal.
That might be an understatement.
Right. We're talking about a man whose shadow stretches across 500 years of history. You see his name on churches, you see his face on statues, you hear his hymns.
If you speak German, he basically helped create your modern language. Even in English, so many of our idioms, our ways of phrasing things, you can trace them back to his Bible translation.
We're talking, of course, about Martin Luther.
And it is almost impossible to overstate his impact. But that's actually, the problem we face when we try to talk about him.
How so?
Well, when you deal with a figure of Luther's magnitude, the great reformer, he stops being a person and he starts being a marble statue. We see the hero of history, the guy who stood up to the emperor, hammer in hand, fearless and unshakable.
Exactly. We see the icon. But today, our mission, our whole goal for this deep dive is to, I guess, take a sledgehammer to that marble.
I like that analogy.
We want to move beyond the myth and find the human being underneath. And based on this massive stack of sources, documents, letters, and historical records you brought to the table, that man underneath was, well, he was complicated.
Complicated is certainly the diplomatic word for it. He was a man of profound, almost violent contradictions. I mean, that's what we're going to explore today, right? How a humble monk who was literally paralyzed by a terror of hell ended up shattering the unity of the Roman Catholic Church.
And it's not just that. This is a man who translated the Bible for the common people, which is this incredible act of democratizing faith.
Right.
Yet he also wrote things in his later years that are, they're deeply disturbing and problematic.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we're definitely going to get into all of that. This isn't the sanitized Sunday school version where he, nails some paper to a door and everyone lives happily ever after.
No, this story is full of lightning bolts, smuggling nuns in herring barrels, shouting matches with cardinals.
And some truly dark chapters that often get left out of the highlight reel. It really is a story that defies any simple categorization.
For sure. But if you want to understand the Western world today, our ideas of individuality, conscience, and authority, you have to grapple with Luther.
And to do that, you have to grapple with his demons, both real and imagined.
So let's start at the very beginning. Before the hammer, before the 95 Theses, let's talk about the making of the monk. Where does Martin Luther come from? Because I think we need to understand the world he was born into to understand why he did what he did.
Absolutely. So he was born on November 10th, 1483 in Eisleben, in what was then the Holy Roman Empire. Now, we have to pause there. The world of 1483 is not our world. It's a world of absolute terrifying precariousness.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the Black Death was still a recent memory. It would sweep through every few generations. Child mortality was...
And it wasn't just physical danger, right? It was, the spiritual atmosphere was totally different from today.
Correct. The world was enchanted, but not in a Disney way. It was enchanted with dread. For the average person in Saxony, the air was thick with demons, witches, hobgoblins, and evil spirits. Everything was a spiritual battle.
And God is presiding over all of this.
Yes, but not necessarily a gentle shepherd God. This was God the Judge, the Almighty who could strike you dead at any moment and cast you into eternal fire. The anxiety level of the average medieval person about the state of their soul was, it was off the charts compared to today.
And into this high-anxiety world, Martin Luther is born. His parents were Hans and Margaret Luther, the spelling changed to Luther later. And his dad, Hans. He wasn't a theologian or a priest. He sounds like a character we'd recognize today.
Oh, Hans is the original tiger dad. No question. Hans Luther was a quintessential self-made man. He wasn't a peasant, but he wasn't nobility either. He was part of that rising trading class. He worked his way up from basically nothing to become a leaseholder of copper mines and smelters.
Copper mining in the 15th century. That doesn't sound like a desk job.
It was dirty, dangerous, brutal work. But Hans was ambitious. He was hardworking, and he wanted to rise in society. He eventually became a town councilor, and naturally he wanted that same success and more for his son.
He saw Martin as the vehicle for the family's social ascension.
100%. The classic ambitious father. I read that he had a very specific career path mapped out for Martin. He didn't say, follow your passion, son. No, the vision was secure the family fortune. Hans Luther wanted his eldest son to be a lawyer. That was the golden ticket in the Holy Roman Empire. Law meant social mobility, it meant financial security, and it meant prestige.
So he spares no expense on Martin's education.
None. He poured the profits from the copper mines into Martin's schooling. He sent him to the best Latin schools in Mansfeld, Magdeburg, and Eisenach.
And Martin didn't exactly look back on those school days with fondness, did he?
No, definitely not. Luther later described his education as purgatory and hell.
Wow. He really didn't mince words. Was he just, complaining? Or was it actually that bad?
It was likely that bad. I mean, the teaching style of the time was just brutal. It was all rote learning. Memorize, recite, repeat. The trivium grammar, rhetoric, logic. It was a rigid system designed to break the will and form the mind.
And if you messed up?
If you missed a disclension in Latin, you got the rod. It was physical discipline mixed with mental exhaustion. But the thing is, Martin was brilliant. He was very, very good at it.
So the system worked, in a way. It produced a disciplined mind.
It did. By 1501, he's 17 years old, and he enters the University of Erfurt. It was one of the best universities in Germany at the time.
I think he had a nickname for it, too.
He called it a beer house and whorehouse, which, gives you a sense of the student life there. But he kept his head down. He woke up at 4 a.m. every day for rote learning and spiritual exercises. He received his master's degree in 1505.
So he is checking every box. He's the star student. And following his father's strict plan, he enrolls in law school. Hans Luther is probably, popping the mead.
He must have been so proud. The plan is working. The investment is about to pay off.
Everything was going according to plan. Until July 2, 1505.
The inciting incident.
The lightning bolt.
Quite literally. Luther was riding back to university after a trip home to visit his parents. He gets caught in a violent thunderstorm near the village of Stotternheim. And again, we have to put ourselves in the mindset of a medieval man here. This isn't just, dangerous weather, I might get wet. This is divine wrath. This is God speaking through nature.
It's the judge coming for him.
Exactly. The sky turns black. The thunder shakes the ground. A lightning bolt strikes right near him. Some accounts say it knocked him from his horse. The air smells of ozone and sulfur. He is terrified. He thinks, this is it. I am dying, and I am not ready. I am going to hell.
And in that moment of sheer panic, he cries out.
But he doesn't cry out to God directly, does he? No, he cries out to St. Anna, "Help, St. Anna, I will become a monk."
Why St. Anna? What's the significance there?
She was the patron saint of miners, his father's patron saint. It was an instinctual cry to the protector of his family. But the content of the cry, "I will become a monk," that was the pivot point of his entire life.
That is a massive overcorrection. He goes from, I don't want to die, to, I'll drop out of law school and join a monastery. It sounds so impulsive.
It was impulsive, but in the medieval mind, a vow made to a saint during a moment of mortal peril was a binding contract. He survived the storm, and he viewed that cry for help as an unbreakable vow. It was like, you saved my life, now my life belongs to the church.
So he really felt he had no choice.
He felt compelled by honor and by fear. 2 weeks later, he throws a farewell party for his university friends. He gives away his expensive law books, his lute, and on July 17th, 1505, he walks into St. Augustine's monastery in Erfurt, the Black Cloister.
I can just imagine his dad, Hans, was absolutely thrilled about this development.
Furious doesn't even begin to cover it. Hans saw it as a complete waste of an expensive education and a betrayal of his duty to the family. When Martin later tried to reconcile with him, Hans said something like, "God grant that it was not an apparition of the devil."
He thought Martin was hallucinating.
He thought his son was throwing his entire life away because of a bad dream in a storm.
So Martin trades the law books for the cowl. He becomes an Augustinian friar. But this didn't exactly solve his anxiety, did it? I mean, he went there to find peace with God, but the sources say he found the opposite.
That's the great irony of his life. He dedicated himself to the monastic life with an incredible, almost frightening intensity. He was an overachiever at being a monk.
What does that even look like?
Fasting until he was skeletal, long, long hours of prayer, sleeping without blankets in the freezing winter to mortify the flesh, frequent confession.
And he wasn't doing this to show off.
No, not at all. He was doing it because he was terrified. He was trying to solve a spiritual math problem that couldn't be solved. The theology he was taught said that you had to be contrite, truly sorry for your sins, and then do penance to be forgiven.
Okay.
But Luther's brain was too analytical for that. He would ask himself, am I really sorry, or am I just afraid of being punished? If I'm just afraid, then I'm not truly contrite. If I'm not contrite, I'm not forgiven. If I'm not forgiven, I'm going to hell.
That's a spiral. It's a feedback loop of anxiety.
He called it Anfechtungen. It's a German word that's hard to translate perfectly. It means spiritual trial, terror, despair, assault. He felt that God was not a loving father, but a jailer and hangman. He had this quote that really stuck with me. I did not love, yes, I hated the righteous God who punishes sinners.
He hated God. That is a heavy, heavy admission for a monk to make.
It was his crisis point. He was spiraling. He was driving his superiors crazy. His confessor was a man named Johann von Staupitz, the vicar general of the Augustinian order. Luther would confess for hours and hours over the tiniest infractions.
I can't imagine being on the other side of that screen.
Staupitz eventually told him, Martin, God is not angry with you. You are angry with God.
Staupitz sounds like a pretty good therapist for the 16th century.
He really was. And he made a brilliant management decision. He realized that Luther had too much time to just sit and think about himself, to obsess. He needed a job. He needed a distraction. So Staupitz ordered him to pursue an academic career. He basically said, go get your doctorate and teach the Bible.
Go study the scriptures so you stop obsessing over your own thoughts.
Exactly. And that one order changed history, because it sent Luther to a new, small university in a town called Wittenberg.
Okay, so let's move to part 2, Wittenberg. This is where the magic happens. Luther becomes a professor of theology in 1512, and he starts lecturing on the Bible, Psalms, Romans, Galatians.
And this is where the aha moment occurs. It wasn't overnight. It was a process over several years, what scholars call the Tower experience. But as he is wrestling with the text, specifically Paul's letter to the Romans, his entire worldview shifts.
So unpack that shift for us, because theological terms can get dry pretty fast, but this is the engine of the entire Reformation. What was the old way of thinking, and what was Luther's new way?
Okay, so the old way, the Catholic view at the time, was essentially what we call synergism.
Cooperation.
Yes. The idea was that God offers grace, but you have to do your part. You cooperate with that grace. You earn merit through the sacraments, through good works, through charity. It's like a spiritual ledger. You sin, you get debt, you do penance, you pay it off.
Which explains Luther's anxiety perfectly.
Yeah.
You can never be sure the ledger is balanced. You never know if you've paid enough.
Precisely. It's a treadmill of spiritual anxiety you can never get off. But while studying Romans 1.7, the just shall live by faith, Luther realized something else. He looked at the Greek word for justice, or righteousness. He concluded that righteousness isn't a standard we have to meet or achieve. It's a gift God gives.
Wait, explain that distinction with an analogy if you can.
Okay. Imagine you have a massive credit card debt.
Yeah.
Millions of dollars. You can never, ever pay it off. The old way says, here's a payment plan. If you work hard every single day for the rest of your life, maybe you can pay down the interest.
An impossible task.
Right. The Luther way says, someone else, Christ has already paid the bill in full. The debt is gone. You just have to accept the receipt.
So it's a one-way street, not a cooperation.
Exactly. The theologians call it monergism. For Luther, it became solified. Faith alone. He realized that you are not justified because you are good, you are justified because Christ is good, and he gives that righteous status to you as a gift, through faith. Luther said when he understood this, I felt that I was altogether born again and had entered paradise itself through open gates.
So the pressure is off, the anxiety is gone, the jailer God became the loving Father. It must have been incredibly liberating for him.
It shattered his medieval anxiety. But it was about to shatter the peace of the church, too. Because while Luther is in Wittenberg discovering that grace is free, the church hierarchy is doubling down on the idea that grace is for sale.
Which brings us to the indulgence crisis. This is the spark that lights the powder keg.
And to understand this, you really have to follow the money. Because this wasn't just about theology, this was about construction projects and high finance.
So who are the key players here?
Okay, you have Pope Leo X in Rome. He's a Medici, very cultured, very expensive tastes. He is rebuilding St. Peter's Basilica, that magnificent structure we see today in the Vatican. That costs an absolute fortune.
An expensive taste requires deep pockets.
Very deep. And then you have Archbishop Spark of Mainz in Germany. He's a young, ambitious noble who wants to be the primate of Germany. To get that job, he has to pay the Pope a huge fee.
Then he doesn't have the cash.
No, so he borrows it from the Fuggers. They were like the Rothschilds or the Goldman Sachs of the 16th century, the biggest banking family in Europe.
So the Archbishop is in debt to the bankers, and the Pope needs money for his building. It sounds like a modern financial scandal.
It basically is. So they hatch a plan. The Pope authorizes a special plenary indulgence to be sold in Germany. An indulgence was technically a remission of the temporal punishment for sin, basically buying time off from purgatory for yourself or your deceased relatives.
And the money gets split.
Yep. Half the money goes to the Pope for the basilica, half goes to the bankers to pay off Archbishop Albrecht's loan.
It's a fundraising scheme.
It is. And to run the scheme, they hire a closer, a man named Johann Tetzel. This guy was the Billy Mays of the 16th century, a real showman. He was a Dominican friar with a flair for the dramatic. He would come into town with crumpets and banners. He'd preach a sermon that would terrify you about your dead parents suffering in the flames of purgatory.
And he had that famous jingle.
He did. It's attributed to him. As soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs.
That is catchy. I hate it, but it's catchy. And terribly manipulative.
Luther thought so, too. He was a pastor in Wittenberg. His own parishioners were crossing the river to buy these indulgences from Tetzel and coming back claiming they didn't need to repent anymore because they had bought a ticket to heaven.
Luther, the man who spent years agonizing over true repentance, must have been absolutely furious.
He was outraged. He saw it as spiritual fraud. He believed it was giving people a false security. He thought the Pope was being misled or that the people were being scammed out of their salvation. So on October 31st, 1517, he decides to start a debate.
This is the date everyone knows, Reformation Day. He writes the 95 Theses.
Or to give it its full title, the Disputation on the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences.
Now, we have to address the image everyone has in their head. Luther, hammer in hand, dramatically pounding these papers onto the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. Fact or fiction?
It's debated. A lot of serious scholars think it might be a legend. The story comes from Philip Melanchthon, who was Luther's right-hand man, but Melanchthon wasn't actually in Wittenberg in 1517 when it supposedly happened.
Right.
And Luther himself, in all his writings about that time, he never once mentioned nailing them to the door.
So he might have just mailed them.
We know for a fact he mailed them. He wrote a very respectful letter to his bishop, Albrecht of Mainz, the guy in debt. And he enclosed the theses. He was following proper academic protocol. He wanted a scholarly disputation among theologians.
But whether he nailed them or mailed them, they didn't stay in the envelope?
No. And this is where the technology of the day comes in, the printing press. This is the first time in history a message goes truly viral. Luther wrote the theses in Latin, intended only for scholars, but some of his friends translated them into German without really asking him. They printed them.
And they went everywhere.
Everywhere. It was a firestorm. Within 2 weeks, they were all over Germany. Within a month, they were all over Europe. Luther woke up one day and found out he was the most famous or infamous man in the Holy Roman Empire.
And the content wasn't just dry theology. I mean, some of it was pretty spicy.
Oh, absolutely. Thesis 86 is a classic zinger. He asks, why does the Pope, whose wealth today is greater than the wealth of the richest Roman emperor, build the Basilica of St. Peter with the money of poor believers rather than with his own money?
Ouch. That's a direct shot at the wallet.
It was, and that's why it resonated with so many people. It tapped into a deep vein of German resentment against Rome, taxing them to build palaces in Italy. Luther suddenly became the voice of that national frustration.
So, the cat is out of the bag. The theses are everywhere. How does the empire strike back? This brings us to part 3 of our story.
Initially, Rome was very slow to react. Pope Leo X, he dismissed it as a monkish squabble. He famously said, Luther is a drunken German. He will feel different when he is sober.
Famous last words.
Indeed. But as the sales of indulgences plummeted, the church realized they had a serious problem on their hands. The money was drying up. They had to act.
They send in the heavy hitters.
They do. In 1518, Luther is summoned to Augsburg to meet with Cardinal Cajetan. Cajetan was a brilliant theologian, a top-tier Dominican intellectual. He expected Luther to just show up, recant, kiss the ring, and go back to his monastery.
But Luther isn't really the shut-up type.
Not at all. The meeting turned into a shouting match. Luther insisted that the Pope was not above Scripture. Cajetan insisted on papal authority. It ended with Luther having to literally slip out of the city at night to avoid being arrested.
A narrow escape. And then things escalate even further. The Leipzig debate in 1519.
Right. This was against another brilliant debater named Johann Eck. And Eck was a shark. He was a skilled debater who knew exactly how to trap Luther. He pushed Luther on point after point until he got him to admit that popes and even church councils could make mistakes.
Which is heresy.
It is absolute heresy. Eck then compared Luther to Jan Hus, a Czech reformer who had been burned at the stake a century earlier for saying similar things. And Luther, in the heat of the debate, essentially said, yes, Hus was right about some things.
That was crossing the Rubicon.
That was it. By admitting that, Luther had declared war not just on indulgences, but on the entire authority structure of the Church.
So the Church has had enough. In June of 1520, the Pope issues a bull.
Exsurge Domine, arise, O Lord, and judge your cause. A wild boar has invaded your vineyard. It condemned 41 of Luther's errors and gave him 60 days to recant or face excommunication.
And how does Luther respond to this terrifying threat from the Vicar of Christ?
He burns it.
He burns the Pope's decree.
Publicly. In Wittenberg. He throws the papal bull onto a bonfire of canon law books, surrounded by his students. That is the point of no return.
So formal excommunication follows in January 1521. He's officially kicked out of the Church, but he's still a subject of the empire. So now the Holy Roman Emperor himself, Charles V, gets involved.
The Diet of Worms, April 1521. This is the climax of the early Reformation. It's the big showdown.
And Diet of Worms always sounds funny to modern ears, but Diet just means assembly, and Worms is a city in Germany.
Correct. So Luther is summoned to appear before the emperor. He's given a guarantee of safe conduct, but he knows what happened to Jan Hus. He had safe conduct too, and they burned him anyway. His friends begged him not to go.
He goes anyway.
He goes. He said he would go to Worms even if there were as many devils as tiles on the roofs. He stands before the emperor, the princes, all the assembled power of Europe. There's a pile of his books on a table in front of him.
A pretty intimidating scene.
Immensely. The prosecutor points to the books and asks him 2 questions. Are these your books? And will you recant what you've written in them?
And he asks for time.
He does, and this is a moment that really humanizes him. The first day, he speaks quietly, almost in a whisper. He asks for a day to think about his answer. He wobbles a bit. He was clearly intimidated. You can imagine him in his room that night thinking, am I really right? Is everyone else in 1,500 years of history wrong?
But he comes back the next day.
He comes back with his resolve stiffened. He delivers the speech that, in many ways, defines the modern idea of individual conscience. He refuses to divide his books into good and bad. And he says, unless I am convinced by the testimony of the Scriptures or by clear reason, my conscience is captive to the Word of God. I cannot and I will not recant anything, since it is neither safe nor right to go against conscience. May God help me. Amen.
And the famous line, here I stand, I can do no other. Did he actually say that?
It's a bit like the church door story. Scholars generally agree that the specific words, here I stand, I can do no other, were likely added in later printed versions to make it punchier, more dramatic, but the sentiment is 100% accurate to what he said. Witnesses at the time said he raised his arm like a knight winning a tournament bout. He had taken his stand.
And the verdict?
The Edict of Worms. It declares him an outlaw. We want him to be apprehended and punished as a notorious heretic. The edict essentially made it legal for anyone to kill him without consequence. He was bird-free, as they said. A dead man walking.
Which brings us to one of the most cinematic twists in history. The kidnapping.
Yes. So Luther is traveling back home from Worms. Suddenly, in the forest near Wittenberg, a group of armed horsemen surround his wagon. They pull him out, they curse at him, and they ride off with him into the woods.
But they weren't enemies.
No. It was a setup. It was orchestrated by his protector, Frederick the Wise, the Elector of Saxony. Frederick wanted to keep Luther safe, but he couldn't be seen openly defying the emperor, so he staged a fake kidnapping and had Luther hidden away at the Wartburg Castle.
Clever? Plausible deniability.
Exactly. Even Frederick didn't want to know exactly where Luther was, so he could honestly tell the emperor, I don't know.
So Luther disappears. The world thinks he might have been captured and killed.
Yeah.
But he's actually sitting in a castle, growing a beard, and going by the alias Junker Jörg Knight George.
And this period of exile at the Wartburg is incredibly productive. He's isolated. He's fighting with depression again. He talks about fighting the devil in his room, hearing noises. There's the famous story of him throwing an ink pot at the devil. But he channels that energy into work.
The translation project.
This is monumental. He decides to translate the New Testament from the original Greek into German. And he does it in just 11 weeks.
11 weeks. That is blindingly fast.
It's an incredible feat of intellect and focus. But it's more than just the speed. It was the kind of German he used. He used the Saxon Chancellery dialect, which was sort of a middle ground that was intelligible to both Northern and Southern Germans. He wanted a German that could be understood by the mother in the home, the children on the street, the common man in the marketplace.
Before this, German was just a mess of different dialects, right?
Mm.
A Bavarian might not understand a Saxon.
Right. Luther's Bible helped standardize the modern German language. It gave the German people a unified voice, and crucially, it put the Bible into the hands of ordinary people. You didn't need a priest to tell you what it said anymore. You could read it for yourself.
That is the ultimate democratization of religion. But while he's up in the castle translating down in Wittenberg, things are getting a little crazy.
Complete chaos. Without Luther there to steer the ship, more radical reformers took over. Men like Andreas Karlstadt and a group called the Zwickau Prophets. They started smashing statues in churches, destroying images, preaching radical social revolution.
This is the Pandora's box problem. Once you say question authority, people start questioning all authority.
Exactly. And Luther did not want chaos. He was a conservative revolutionary. He wanted to reform the theology, not overturn the entire social order. So in 1522, he comes out of hiding and returns to Wittenberg.
A huge risk.
A massive risk. He preaches a series of sermons called the Invokavit sermons. He calms the mob. He effectively says, faith needs to be free. You can't force people to believe. He pushes the radicals out and restores order. He becomes, ironically, the conservative force within his own Reformation.
But the fire was already spreading beyond just church statues. And this leads to the Peasants' War in 1524. This is a tough chapter for Luther fans to reconcile.
It is the most controversial moment of his political life. The peasants in Germany had valid, long-standing grievances. They were being crushed by taxes and serfdom. They heard Luther talking about Christian freedom and the priesthood of all believers, and they interpreted that politically.
They thought he was on their side.
They thought Luther was their champion against the oppressive lords. They launched a massive rebellion across Germany.
And what was Luther's initial reaction?
At first, he tried to mediate. He wrote a pamphlet scolding the princes, telling them they were being too harsh and tyrannical. But as the violence grew, as the peasants started burning castles, killing nobles, creating total anarchy, Luther turned on them, viciously.
He wrote another pamphlet with the title that tells you everything you need to know. Against the murderous, thieving hordes of peasants.
And the content is shocking to modern readers. He told the nobles to smite, slay, and stab the rebels like they were mad dogs. He said there was nothing more poisonous, hurtful, or devilish than a rebel.
He sided completely with the state power. Why?
He did. He believed that while all people are equal before God in the spiritual realm, in the earthly realm, you must obey the authorities that God has established. He feared chaos more than he feared tyranny. The result was a massacre. The princes crushed the rebellion. Thousands upon thousands of peasants were killed.
And Luther lost the support of the common peasantry largely after that. He became the theologian of the princes.
It secured the Reformation's political survival for sure. The princes protected him, but it came at a terrible human cost. It defined Lutheranism as a state-supported religion, not a popular uprising.
And right in the middle of all this death and chaos, Luther decides to do something. Surprisingly cheerful. He gets married.
Yes. It's a great story that contrasts so sharply with the war. In 1523, he helped a group of 12 nuns escape from a convent in Nimschen.
How did he get them out?
He had a merchant friend smuggle them out of the convent, hidden in empty herring barrels.
Classic romance. Nothing says I love you like the smell of pickled fish.
Well, once they were out, he felt responsible for them. He managed to marry most of them off to various friends or students, but there was one left. A woman named Katharina von Bora. She was 26. Luther was 41. She was stubborn and intelligent.
And she had her eye on Luther.
She did. She basically told a friend, I won't marry anyone else. I'll marry Dr. Luther.
And he did it.
He did. Even his friends were shocked. His closest ally, Melanchthon, thought it was a reckless move during such a chaotic time. But Luther said he did it to spite the devil.
And to set a precedent.
Exactly. He wanted to prove that clerical marriage was good and biblical. They moved into the Black Cloister, his old monastery, which the elector gave them as a home, and Katie, as he called her, took charge. She was incredible. She managed the finances, the brewery, the farm, the dozens of students who boarded with them. They had 6 children.
It turned out to be a genuinely happy marriage.
It did. It wasn't romantic initially, but it became a deep and loving partnership. He called her My Lord Katie. It established the model of the Protestant parsonage, the pastor and his family living as a pillar of the community, not set apart in a celibate tower.
So we've had the monk, the rebel, the husband. Now we have to look at the older Luther. And this is where the picture gets darker. Part 6, controversies and his darker years.
We can't avoid these. As Luther got older, he got crankier, he got sicker, and he became much more stubborn.
Let's talk about the bigamy scandal first. This one always surprises people.
The Philip of Hesse affair in 1539. So Philip was a leading Protestant prince, a crucial ally to the movement's military defense. He was trapped in an unhappy political marriage, but he had fallen in love with a lady-in-waiting and wanted to marry her. Divorce wasn't really an option politically.
So he asked Luther for advice.
He does. And Luther, along with Melanchthon, makes a terrible calculation. They look at the Old Testament patriarchs, Abraham, Jacob, who had multiple wives, and they advise Philip to marry her secretly as a second wife.
Bigamy?
Technically, yes. They argued it was a lesser evil than divorce or ongoing adultery. But of course, in the courts of Europe, nothing stays secret. It leaked. It became a huge scandal. And to make it worse, Luther then advised Philip to tell a good, strong lie to cover it up.
That is not great moral leadership.
It damaged his reputation significantly. It looked like he was bending God's law to please a powerful political patron. It showed he was willing to compromise his ethics for what he saw as political necessity.
But the biggest shadow over Luther's legacy, the one that is impossible to ignore, is his attitude toward Jewish people.
Yes. This is the most difficult and painful part of Luther's story, and we have to face it head on.
It didn't start that way, though. There was a shift.
No, it didn't. In 1523, earlier in his career, he wrote a treatise called That Jesus Christ Was Born a Jew. In it, he advised kindness. He argued that Jewish people hadn't converted to Christianity because the Catholic Church had been so corrupt and had treated them so badly. He thought that if he presented the pure gospel, they would convert in large numbers.
So it was a missionary strategy. Be nice and they'll join us.
Exactly, but they didn't join. They remained Jewish. And as the years went on, Luther took this rejection very personally. He became bitter and hostile. He couldn't understand why anyone would reject his truth unless they were stubborn or evil.
And in 1543, just 3 years before his death, he writes, On the Jews and Their Lies.
It is a horrific document. There is no other way to describe it. It is violent, hateful rhetoric.
What specifically did he call for?
He called for burning their synagogues and schools, for destroying their prayer books, forbidding rabbis from preaching on pain of death, seizing their property and expelling them from the land. He called them envenomed worms and the devil's people.
That sounds like a blueprint for what happened in the 20th century.
Many historians argue that it provided the theological and cultural groundwork for the Nazis later on. The Nazis absolutely co-opted this book. They reprinted it and displayed it at rallies. Kristallnacht, the Night of Broken Glass in 1938, happened on Luther's birthday, November 10th. A pro-Nazi bishop at the time even applauded the burning of synagogues as a fitting tribute to Luther.
That is chilling.
Yeah.
I need to be clear here, though. Luther's motivation was theological, not racial, correct?
That is the important distinction historians make. It was religious anti-Judaism, not modern racial anti-Semitism. If a Jewish person converted to Christianity, Luther would have accepted them as a brother. It wasn't about blood for him, but the rhetoric, the violence of the language. It absolutely laid a groundwork of hatred in Germany that was easily exploited by racists centuries later.
It's a stain on his legacy that you can't wash out.
You can't. And modern Lutheran churches have formally repudiated these writings. They've apologized for them. But you can't study Luther without facing this darkness. It shows that he was a man capable of incredible courage, but also incredible hate.
So we have this deeply complex man, a genius, a revolutionary, a husband, a bigot. Let's go to his final years, part 7.
His health was failing badly. He suffered from Meniere's disease, which causes awful vertigo and tinnitus, a constant ringing in the ears. He had kidney stones, cataracts. He was in constant pain.
And pain makes you grumpy.
Incredibly, he admitted it himself. He said, "They're teaching me to be rude." He was fighting everyone, the Pope, the Jews, the lawyers, even his own supporters sometimes. He was just tired and angry.
And how does the end come?
In 1546, he travels back to Eisleben, the very town where he was born. He went to mediate a dispute between the Counts of Mansfeld regarding those copper mines.
Full circle. Born in Eisleben, dies in Eisleben.
He preached his last sermon there. On February 18th, 1546, he had severe chest pains. He knew it was the end.
And even on his deathbed, people were watching to see if he would recant.
Exactly. The stakes were still that high. If he recanted at the last moment, the whole Reformation might collapse. His friends, Justice Jonas and Michael Coelius, were with him. They shouted in his ear, "Reverend Father, are you ready to die trusting in your Lord Jesus Christ and to confess the doctrine which you have taught in his name?"
And his answer?
A distinct yes. He died shortly after.
But he left one last note, didn't he?
Yeah.
A scrap of paper found in his pocket after he died.
He did. It's the perfect epitaph for his whole life, really. A mix of Latin and German. The last line reads, We are beggars. This is true. Wir sind Bettler. Hoc est verum.
We are beggars. What did he mean by that?
It goes right back to his core discovery in that tower. We come to God with empty hands. We don't earn anything. We don't trade our good works for salvation. We can only beg for grace, and it is given freely. It was a final confession of humility from a man who often seemed so arrogant. It was him admitting that despite all his works, all his writing, all his battles, at the end of the day, he was just a beggar before God.
So I'll try to sum up the legacy. It's massive.
It's incalculable. Religiously, he permanently split Western Christianity. He created Protestantism as a major branch of the faith.
Culturally.
The German Bible. He shaped the modern German language. And the music. We haven't touched enough on the music. He wrote these powerful hymns like, "A Mighty Fortress is Our God." He introduced congregational singing. Before Luther, the choir sang in Latin. After Luther, everyone in the pews sang together in their own language. He turned church into a participatory event.
And politically, you have the concept of the two kingdoms, this idea of a separation between the authority of the church and the authority of the state.
And you can't forget the legend of the swan.
Oh, right, the swan prophecy.
Johann Huss, the reformer who was burned at the stake in 1415. The name Huss means goose in the Bohemian language. And the legend says that as he was burning, he prophesied, "Today you will roast a goose, but in 100 years' time you will hear a swan sing. You had better listen to him."
And Luther is the swan.
That's how the Lutherans saw it. That's why you often see a swan as a symbol in Lutheran art.
So here we are at the end of this deep dive. We've unpacked the monk, the reformer, the husband, the anti-Semite.
It's a lot to hold in your mind at once, a lot of contradictions.
It is. It forces us to confront the nature of great men in history. We want our heroes to be simple. We want perfect marble statues. Luther just refuses to be that.
He illustrates, maybe better than anyone, that profound genius and incredible courage can coexist with deep, ugly flaws and prejudices. The same passion that gave him the courage to stand alone against an empire also fueled his later hatreds. You don't get the one without the other.
It raises a provocative question for me and for you listening. If Luther had died in 1521, right after the Diet of Worms,
he would be a pure martyr, an uncomplicated hero of conscience. We wouldn't have the anti-Semitic writings. We wouldn't have the incitement against the peasants. He would be remembered very, very differently.
But we also might not have the complete German Bible, or the stable church structure he built later, or the hymns.
Exactly. History is messy. You can't just cherry-pick the parts you like.
It certainly is. And that is why we do these deep dives, to look at the full picture, warts and all.
And with Luther, there are plenty of warts, but the picture is undeniably powerful.
Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks for taking this deep dive with us into the life of Martin Luther. It's been a wild ride.
A fascinating one. Thanks for having me.
See you next time.